I just want to congratulate both Rob and Khalil on the Piccolo Award. It's a great honor, and I'm happy for both of those guys. Just an update from the last time we spoke. We have the players in, which has been really exciting. There's a lot of energy in the building. You can feel the buzz. You can feel their presence. You can see our coaches getting excited as well. Some of the things we talked about earlier, just in terms of finding teachers, you can see that playing out already. And those results are on the field. With it being voluntary in terms of the off-season program, the really cool thing that we all appreciated the guys that did show up, and the biggest part of that is just the personal interactions that we have. I do think it takes time to build trust and build relationships with those guys, and that's something that we're working on, and it's going really well. I think the other thing that's probably underrated more than anything is the time they spend together in the locker room, getting to know each other. You have a group of new players in with the players that were here before. So just working on that chemistry, both on the field and in the locker room. It's important in this sport, so we're excited about that. In terms of the draft, I got to start by just thanking my crew of scouts. They put a lot of hours into it. A ton of time, a lot of conversations, a lot of film watching, so that we're prepared and we're doing the right thing, we're making the right decisions. I got to thank the coaches. They've done an outstanding job. We got a group of really good evaluators. They communicate well. They were able to talk about the fit, the role that some of these players would have on this team, which is very important because you want clarity with that. You want to know exactly where these players are going to play. Usually you can get in trouble if you don't have that clarity. You get guys falling through the cracks, so that's been really good. And then on top of that, some of the more important things that aren't talked about, which is the medical. Our medical staff spent a lot of time review a lot of medical information and really assessing that and communicating and giving us clarity of guys that we believe are durable or they may need some extra assistance with our performance group in terms of staying healthy and managing their bodies. The other piece is engagement, just in terms of making sure that they're not only fits outside the building, but also in our locker room. That conversation is important, as well as security, to make sure that everyone in our community, it's a good fit for our community as well. I do want to give a quick shout out to Mike Santarelli. He does our system, our database. I've been really demanding on him just in terms of making last-minute changes with our technology so that our tools and really the visuals that we're using to make good decisions and make them fast are up and running, and he's done an unbelievable job. We're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to have him in our corner. We have some really, really cool things that allow us to make great decisions. Our scouts came in the beginning of the month for about 12 days leading up to Easter. I let them go home for Easter, and then they're coming in tonight. And we had great debate, great conversation. We did some new things. We took polls. We would watch players stacked up in their position, and we'd poll everybody off their cell phone. And that information would come down to a database, and we'd display it on the screen. So we'd see how everyone had it ranked. Sometimes it was a runaway for the top guys. Sometimes it was a really tight race that just led to more conversation and for us to watch more tape. So really good discussions to go deeper than just watching tape. And then we also did that going horizontal. So not only in positional stacks, but you did that across the board as well. That's where it gets tricky. Do you take this position and this position of all things are even? So learned a lot about our scouts, learned a lot about us as a group. And again, all of this was done so that we make good decisions and we have our board set up the right way. And then from there, I was talking with Ian about this. I had a coach, his name was Don Horton. He passed away in 2016, and he was one of the best coaches I've ever had. And the reason why is because he would take us in all these different hours and times, and he'd take us behind the bleachers, and he'd have blitz cards, and he would show over and over and over and over again every single day. And when you got to game day and you played the game, it slowed down, right? So you would know defensive front and how they're lined up, and they'd go about their thing, and you would just kind of wait for people to come to you and go away, and you communicate at a high level. So what we've done the last few days is we ran simulations of the draft over and over and over and over again to our picks. We had guys call in fake trades just to test our communication, test our trade charts, test all of that to make sure that everything's smooth on game day. And we're just applying that, and that's, I feel really confident at this point, and it has a lot to do with the work of really everybody who's been all hands on deck, so I'm excited. But I'll open it up for questions for you guys.
You've obviously experienced the draft under 3 different general managers in Kansas City. What have you done philosophically to develop a stance on when it makes sense to trade up, when it makes sense to trade back, and how does that change based on the day of the draft it is?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing is how many players you have at a certain level. So can you move back and get a quality player at that next spot? And then also take into consideration where, when you get kicked other picks, that's an additional player. So where is that pick located at in the draft? And can I still get a quality player at that level as well? Also, you can accumulate on the back end, and you can package things up and move them again. So really, it's just the volume and where the draft is deep in certain positions.
You guys moved up a bunch in Kansas City. For you, what makes it
A go-time decision for you to go up and get a guy?
Yeah, it comes back down to your board. So there's different values on your board, and if you have certain players that are in a certain section of the board, and it makes sense for your team at that time, then that's something you have to do at the right time. But I think you have to know kind of where your team's at and how many picks you have, and it's a big picture decision because there is an effect of losing picks to move up and get that player.
Ryan, when you first got here and began to evaluate this roster, it was obviously through a limited perspective. Now that you have your chance to kind of see them out on the grass, what things have been confirmed about that you thought about this team, and what things have maybe been a little bit more crystallized or become more clear for you about this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that are confirmed is we got a group of really good guys in the locker room, around the field. I think some of the expectations and standards that we want to meet, we have players that are already in that mindset of doing things. And then watching them perform, there's talent on this team that I'm excited to build around and build with.
How do you balance the availability of all this technology with good old-fashioned scouting?
Yeah. Well, I feel like my foundation is old scouting. That old foundation was set early in my career. A lot of that has to do with just watching a lot of tape. And understanding that sometimes you're taking a good football player. Like sometimes it's just that basic. Like, are we taking a good football player? Do I think you can use some of these tools and technologies to get too cute? Absolutely. But I think my foundation is at the end of the day, I want to take away a good football player because I've watched the tape and there's proof on film. If you get kind of funky with all of a sudden the proof is on paper, I think you're kind of playing with fire a little bit. So that's kind of that old school part. But I do like to use the numbers and the numbers on paper to confirm what I see and what we see.
Ryan, since you got here, you traded Khalil Mack. You let some veterans leave without re-signing them. You added some players on very limited contracts.
Yep.
Are you rebuilding, or is there a different word you use?
Oh. Yeah, no, the rebuild thing's like super sensitive. No, we're constructing a very good football team. Regardless of how you use whatever term that is, we just continue to add talent and young talent, older talent, whatever it takes to make the best team possible. Late night with the wife, you're watching TV, you get like the home network where, there's some rooms that are good. You might have to redo some countertops over here, some fresh paint over there. Some rooms are good. You don't need to touch them. So that's kind of the thought process there.
How important is
That's not a rebuild either.
It's a fixer-upper.
Yeah.
How important, at the risk of an obvious question, how important is getting this draft right to doing that, whatever you want to call it?
Very important. Every draft is important. It's anytime you can bring in new young talent that can create competition and help get better. And obviously with, the way free agency is, you get a rookie contract, you get a little bit of time and to keep tweaking things and improve.
Ryan, what's your mindset going into Thursday night? Obviously, you guys aren't scheduled to be part of that, and how will you kind of just handle eagerness of the night while having to sit back?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun because we spent so much time watching this and just seeing how things play out. The other thing is there's going to be opportunity for us to continue to simulate us having a pick and acting like maybe we're at 10, maybe we're at 20, maybe we're at, and just act like we're in different spots and just repping out the communication to make sure when we go the next day that we're ready.
Right, you were a part of drafts.
project that you're describing, the remodel, and you saw that at the time, you don't have a first-round pick. All you have is a second round and a third rounder. How did you view that part of the challenge as far as trying to construct a team that you wanted, looking at one you inherited that had a lot of holes
Yeah.
and having very limited draft capital to work with?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but at the same time, I mean, that's why I was hired. That's why our group is doing what we do, is to take what we have and construct the best roster we can and have the best draft we can. I do think, we will be in the business depending on where it is and what it looks like and moving back and trying to create more. So that's just what we've been handed, and we're going to maximize that.
Right, you were a part of drafts in Kansas City without first-round picks. I'm curious, when you go into the preparations for that, how different is it just in terms of time spent on certain players and maybe just organizational philosophy?
Yeah, the approach is the same. Now, in terms of, you have limitations on interviews you have at the combine and guys that you can bring in. So you may shift some things around. Maybe, guys in the top 5, probably we could use the time better in other places with other players. But really the approach is the same. We try to construct it as if we're in that mix so that the board's right, because you do want it lined up the right way so you can kind of see it work out.
In your time in Kansas City, what was your biggest impact on draft night or draft weekend? Is there anything that any particular pick or thing you did that at least is even close to what the situation you'll be in this weekend?
Not really, and that's the thing is, I've said this a few times, it's never one. I can honestly say there's never one person making a pick, or you get on the table for certain players, and we've already gone through that, and we're at the point now where pretty much the hay's in the barn. So when you go into draft day, it's a little bit more calm than everyone thinks. It's a little more quiet. Obviously the phones might go off, and that creates a little bit of a deal. But it's just on draft days in the past, it's just gone through the process because the work is in the board. So you kind of let everything trickle the way you're supposed to.
How much different is this weekend going to be for you than any previous draft weekend? Just how big? Obviously the first time.
It's going to be different.
But
Yeah.
how much different is it? How well prepared? How different is it now this weekend as opposed to previous ones?
The responsibility of making the pick, and it's bigger, but at the same time, you just rely on the work that everyone put in to make the right decision. And that was the cool thing about doing a lot of these mock-up drafts is we feel comfortable with the way this thing's going to play out.
Right.
And
When
at
you
the
were doing
conclusion-
when you were doing those polls with your scouts,
Yeah.
horizontal, did you notice some guys looking at positions that might be perceived needs, and how do you want them to balance that? Obviously, you have your own philosophy, but as you're doing that exercise, could you see some people in the room maybe siding with a position that you guys might need a little bit of help at over a player who might be more talented?
For the most part, it was the best player is how most of those played out. Obviously, you can see the votes all the way across the board, so there was a little bit of that, I guess. But for the majority of it, it was the best player. And then on top of that, then you got to go value of the position, and then where the deeper part really goes, instead of just looking at it in a small sample size, is what's below that. Where's the drop-offs at different positions? Where can you get another one where the difference isn't that great? So there's a little bit more that goes into it, but for the most part, with those exercises that we had, it was best player.
Speaking of drop-off,
Roster,
You balance, obviously, bringing in these young players on short-term deals, but also trying to develop Justin Fields. How do you strike that balance of making sure that Justin has enough with him on offense while also with respect to what you're doing with the rest of the roster?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think anytime you just improve the team overall, you're helping all of the players out, and that can look different. You could say, well, he needs receivers, but he needs blocking too, and he also needs balance in terms of running the ball efficiently and getting that done up front. And then you can do some play action pass stuff. You can do different things. So it all touch turnovers, maybe returner to flip the field to score more points. So it's all connected, and that's really why the mindset is to get the best players on this team as possible. If I get too lopsided, be like, I got to do this specific thing, I think that's where you lead into big mistakes.
Speaking of drop-off, when you get to Friday and Saturday
Yeah.
this weekend,
Mhm.
what positions do you see having maybe more talent than some of the others?
I would say the O-line depth is pretty good. There's some good depth with the DBs. There's a couple of defensive linemen. The running back class may not be top heavy, but there's like a ton. It's crazy how many running backs there are. I think a lot of it has to do with the COVID year. A lot of those guys are kicking back, so at middle to bottom, definitely in the free agency, there's a massive amount of players. That's why it took so much time to get the board set, not only at the top but at the bottom. There are a lot of players on this board.
With you guys having a lot of open roster spots right now, maybe more than you typically would going into the draft, did you adjust how you did anything to compensate for the likely need to sign more UDFAs than perhaps usual?
Anything different? No. We're going to need to acquire more. Like I said, for draft picks, I would love to do some movement and get more picks, but it's got to be in the right area. We're prepared for the bottom of the board and late draft as well as free agency. But really the approach is the same, it's just the volume is greater.
Ryan, you look at the wide receiver group and what you have already been able to see of what you have on the field. Do you go into it thinking, okay, this is what we don't have, like I need to address finding a big body receiver and X in the draft, or how do you look at that with some of the day 2 picks?
Yeah, you're aware of it, so you're gonna look for it. It has to be there and it has to be at the right level. And I think that's the biggest takeaway is like you can talk yourself into anything at this point. That's why I'm not overcooking this board. I'm taking a step back after today because I think sometimes you keep staring at it and you'll start sliding guys around and doing crazy stuff. But in terms of being specific, you're looking to identify it, but the key is making sure it's in the right value on the board.
Right. When you came in, you took issue with the offensive line and the condition that was in. Do you see now, after you've had more time to evaluate, I know there haven't been actual practices or anything like that, but do you see on paper a starting 5 that is up to your standards, or do you see more work to do with that unit?
There's always more work. The beautiful thing is all those guys are working really hard, and they're getting better. I think the addition, of Lucas Patrick has been really good. You can feel his effect already. He's got energy. He's got toughness. There's just a presence about him, and then you can feel everyone else coming. And that was the thought process: is these catalysts that kind of bring the whole group along. And he's done that. I've been really happy about his effect. But to answer your question, we're always looking to get better, for sure.
We saw the news of Byron Pringles' arrest over the weekend. How did you handle that situation?
Yeah, he notified me. We had conversations about it, and we're gonna keep that in house. But I'm glad everyone's okay. But we had a conversation about that. We talked about it, and he communicated the right way.
Would you consider that just a disappointment, or what?
Yeah, you never want.
One-time thing, or, what?
So I know him very well, and it's not a reflection of who he is at all. You don't want your guys in the news at all. So, yeah, at that point, it's a disappointment. But like I said, we had good conversations about it. We're in a good place, and we'll keep that internal.
Ryan, with how many receivers out there and other teams have been putting in trade requests to try to get out of their teams and get somewhere else, does that give you, is that intriguing for a general manager to maybe put in those calls to see if those people can, want to come here?
Yeah, it's always intriguing, especially, with a lot of those talented guys. But this goes back to some of the things I talked about before, just in terms of staying disciplined. I truly believe in homegrown talent. I truly believe in drafting the right players and developing them here, and that'll help us in the long run. Especially, we see the cost of a lot of these top receivers is crazy. So it would benefit us to make sure we draft well and develop our own guys.
Ryan, when you say discipline like that,
Three more guys. You mentioned the COVID year, and there seem to be a lot of really good players.
Yeah.
Can you explain why the quarterback draft then is so is weaker than it's been in a long time?
I can't explain that at all. I think you get in different cycles and different years have, certain strengths and weaknesses. And but in terms of the volume for this year, it's hard to answer that.
When you keep saying discipline, are you referring to, discipline in terms of protecting the draft opportunities that you would have in 2023 and 2024 when you have your full sets of picks? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, based on the question that was asked, it's being disciplined in both keeping draft capital so you can draft the right players and develop them, as well as the financial commitment it takes on the other side too. There's consequences for all of those actions.
On the topic of receivers, it's obviously a position that's changed a lot since you've been in the league, and guys are able to contribute much more immediately than they did 15 years ago. What's your sense of why that trend has continued to come where now you can get a day two guy who can make an immediate impact for you?
I would say probably can go all the way down to like youth football with just like 7-on-7 camps that have exploded in Texas and California and Florida. It's year round, and probably that, just in terms of developing early. And then there's a huge volume, and I think the game has changed. We're just throwing the ball at a very high rate, and if you look at the personnel packages that are on the field, sometimes you're rolling out with 4 guys instead of just 2 or 3. So more guys have opportunities to make plays, and I think that's what stands out.
Real quick on the polls, are those like all anonymous that you were conducting with your scouts?
Yeah, so like the key is like sometimes you want to just remove groupthink, right? So like if I polled everyone and you had to raise your hand, I think like some people like looking around like, are we voting for this or not? So it just removes that, and everyone just put their thoughts and ideas down, and it takes that out of it, and you see it. And I put it up on the screen, and you could hear the oohs and the ahs when it was tight or when it was, a surprise. So it was a really cool exercise.